The waitress's hand trembled as she pulled Thomas aside in the bustling upscale bistro tucked between towering office buildings in downtown Manhattan. "Mr. Hargrove, you need to hear this. Charles isn't who you think he is. I've seen him meeting men in secret, whispering about things that could blow up your whole world if they get out. He's hiding a gay life, and it's going to hurt you." Thomas froze, his fork hovering above the untouched salmon. At 38, he had built a tech empire worth billions from a tiny startup in his parents' garage back in Texas. Yet here he stood in his perfectly tailored navy suit, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his Italian leather shoes. "Emily, you've got the wrong guy," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Charles has been my best friend since Harvard. We've launched companies together, buried my mother together, celebrated every milestone. He's straight, successful, and loyal. This is probably just gossip from the kitchen staff." She shook her head, her ponytail swinging. "I wouldn't risk my job for gossip. Last week he was here with a man, not a business contact. The way they looked at each other. It wasn't professional. And I heard him say your name, something about protecting you from the truth. Please, just be careful." She slipped back into the lunch rush before Thomas could respond, leaving him staring at the half-empty wine glass. He paid the bill in a daze and stepped into the crisp October air of New York City. Horns blared. Pedestrians hurried past with their phones glued to their ears. But Thomas felt detached from it all. Charles Whitaker, 37. His vice president of operations and the only person who knew about the panic attacks after his father's heart attack last year. The man who had flown to Texas with him for the funeral, who had sat silently beside him on the plane ride home without asking questions. How could that same Charles be hiding something so enormous? Thomas walked the 12 blocks to his penthouse instead of calling his driver. The exercise usually cleared his head, but today every step echoed with doubt. He remembered their college days, late-night study sessions where Charles would crash on the couch in Thomas's dorm, their shoulders brushing as they laughed about nothing. Thomas had always pushed those memories down, telling himself the warmth he felt was just brotherhood. After all, his family back in Dallas still expected him to bring home a wife someday, and the board of directors at Hargrove Dynamics would never accept a gay CEO. Image was everything in this world. By the time he reached the private elevator of his building, Thomas had convinced himself Emily was mistaken. Charles was probably helping some old friend through a divorce or something equally innocent. He poured a scotch in the sunlit living room overlooking Central Park and texted Charles, "Lunch tomorrow? Need to run some numbers on the new acquisition." The reply came seconds later, "You got it, buddy. Everything okay?" Thomas stared at the screen, thumb hovering. "Yeah, all good," he typed back. But as he sipped the drink, a tiny crack formed in the wall he had built around his heart. What if she was right? That night's sleep came in fragments. Thomas dreamed of Charles laughing beside him at a company gala, their hands almost touching on the table. He woke at 3 a.m., heart racing, and paced the marble floors until dawn. By morning, he had buried the conversation deep. Business waited. Meetings, emails, the relentless machine of his empire demanded his full attention. He dressed in a charcoal suit, knotted the tie with military precision, and told himself the warning was nothing. Charles was family. Nothing more. The day passed in a blur of conference calls and strategy sessions. At 4 p.m., his assistant reminded him of the quarterly board dinner the following week. "Your father called again, sir. Wants to know if you've met anyone special." Thomas smiled tightly and changed the subject. The pressure from Texas never let up. His father still referred to settling down as the only way to prove real success. Thomas had learned long ago to nod and deflect. When he finally collapsed onto the leather sofa that evening, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Thomas allowed himself one honest thought. Charles had always been the only person who made him feel truly seen. He pushed it away immediately. Tomorrow's lunch would be normal. Everything would be fine. The doorbell chimed through the penthouse at exactly 8:15 the next morning. pulling Thomas from his second cup of coffee. He wasn't expecting visitors. Security downstairs never let anyone up without clearance. He opened the heavy oak door and found himself face to face with a man he had never seen before. Early 30s, athletic build, dark hair neatly styled, wearing a crisp white shirt under a navy blazer. His eyes, though, held a depth that made Thomas pause. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm Ryan Ellis. We need to talk about Charles. It's important, and I think you deserve to hear it from someone who actually knows the truth." Thomas's pulse spiked. "How did you get this address?" "I'm calling security." But Ryan raised a hand calmly, no aggression in his posture. "I used to work in your building's security detail 2 years ago. Charles helped me get the job after things got complicated. Please, 5 minutes. After that, you can throw me out." Something in the man's voice, steady yet pained, made Thomas step aside. They sat in the open kitchen, sunlight streaming across the granite island. Ryan declined coffee but accepted water. "Charles and I were together for 14 months, he said quietly. "Not as friends, as partners. He ended it 3 weeks ago because he couldn't keep lying anymore. Not to you, not to himself. He loves you, Thomas. Has for years. The waitress at the bistro is my cousin. She heard him on the phone with me the night he broke things off. He was crying, saying he couldn't risk destroying your life by admitting how he felt." Thomas's glass slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the counter. Water spilled across the surface, but he didn't move to clean it. "You're lying. Charles isn't. He can't be." Ryan pulled a folded photograph from his jacket and slid it across the marble. It showed Charles and Ryan laughing on a beach somewhere warm, arms around each other. The kind of easy intimacy that couldn't be faked. "He protected your secret even while hiding his own. He knew you were struggling with the same thing, but he never pushed. Said you needed to come to it on your own terms. The waitress warned you because she thought you should know before Charles does something stupid like marry that woman his family is pushing on him." Thomas stood up so fast the stool scraped loudly. "Get out." But his voice cracked. Ryan rose slowly, leaving a business card on the counter. "Call me if you want the rest of the story. He still loves you, Thomas. And I think you feel the same, even if you've buried it." The door closed softly behind Ryan. Thomas sank back onto the stool, staring at the photo. Memories crashed over him. Charles staying late at the office just to make sure Thomas ate. The way his eyes lingered during late-night strategy sessions. The quiet support during every crisis. Had it all been more? The thought terrified and electrified him at once. He called Charles immediately. "We need to talk. Now. My place." Charles's voice on the other end sounded normal, concerned. "On my way, buddy. You sound off." Thomas hung up and paced, heart hammering against his ribs. The empire he had built, the family expectations, the carefully constructed image, everything suddenly felt like a house of cards. When Charles arrived 20 minutes later, Thomas met him at the door without a word and led him to the living room. The photo lay on the coffee table. Charles saw it and stopped dead. His face drained of color. "Ryan came here," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Thomas's voice shook. "Is it true? All of it?" Charles met his eyes, and for the first time in 15 years Thomas saw raw vulnerability there. Every word. Silence stretched between them like a living thing. Charles sank onto the sofa, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. "I never meant for you to find out like this. Ryan and it started after your mother's funeral. I was trying to move on, to convince myself I could live without wanting what I couldn't have. You." Thomas remained standing, arms crossed tightly. "All these years you knew I was." He couldn't say the word yet. "Gay? Yeah, I knew. The way you looked away whenever I brought a date to company events. The way you never dated anyone seriously. I saw it because I lived it too." Charles ran a hand through his hair. "But you had the company, the family legacy. Coming out would have cost you everything. So I stayed quiet. Loved you from the sidelines. Protected you even when it killed me. Thomas walked to the window, staring out at the park below where joggers moved in oblivious freedom. The waitress warned me you were hiding a gay life. I thought she meant you were betraying me in business. Not. He gestured helplessly between them. This. Charles stood and joined him at the window. I was going to marry Lauren next spring. My parents adore her. The board would love the stability it signals. I thought if I did the right thing on paper, maybe the feelings would fade. But yesterday when Ryan called to say goodbye, I realized I couldn't do it. Not without telling you the truth first. Thomas turned, their faces inches apart. The air felt charged, heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. What do you want from me, Charles? Nothing you aren't ready to give. But I can't keep pretending anymore. If you want me out of the company, out of your life, I'll go. No questions. The offer hit Thomas like a physical blow. Charles, who had been his constant, offering to disappear. No, he whispered. Don't. They talked for hours. Charles recounted the college nights when he had almost confessed, the business trips where sharing a suite had been torture and heaven at once. Thomas listened, feeling layers of denial peel away. For the first time he allowed himself to name the warmth he had always felt. Love. Not brotherhood. Love. By evening they ordered Thai food and ate in silence on the terrace. The city hummed below, indifferent to the earthquake happening 30 stories up. Thomas's phone buzzed repeatedly, his father calling about the family reunion next month. He silenced it. They'll never accept this, he said quietly. Charles nodded. Mine either. But maybe we don't need their acceptance to be honest with ourselves. That night Charles slept in the guest room. Thomas lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart racing with possibility and terror. The following week brought the first cracks in Thomas's carefully managed world. At the quarterly board meeting, whispers followed him. Someone had leaked that Charles had canceled his engagement. Eyes lingered a second too long when they presented together. Thomas kept his face neutral, but inside the old fear clawed at him. His father flew in unannounced on Thursday. They met for dinner at the same bistro where Emily had delivered her warning. Son, people are talking. Charles moving out of his apartment, canceling the wedding. You two spend too much time together. It doesn't look right. Thomas set his knife down carefully. Dad, Charles is my best friend. That's all. His father leaned forward. I'm not blind. The board is nervous. One rumor and stock dips. Fix it or I will. The threat hung in the air. Thomas drove home in silence, mind racing. That night he and Charles sat on the terrace again, wine glasses in hand. My father knows something's off, Thomas admitted. He's threatening the company. Charles stared into the city lights. Then let me step down. I'll take a lesser role, move to the West Coast office. You keep the image intact. No, the word came out fierce. I won't let you sacrifice your life for mine anymore. The conversation stretched into the early hours. Thomas spoke for the first time about the nights he had cried alone after dates with women that felt like performances. Charles shared the guilt he carried for loving his best friend in secret. Slowly the wall between them dissolved. But family pressure intensified. Thomas's sister called from Dallas, voice tight. Dad says you're throwing everything away. Come home for the weekend. Let's talk. Thomas agreed, mostly to buy time. The weekend in Texas was a battlefield disguised as a family barbecue. His father cornered him by the pool. End whatever this is with Charles. Marry someone suitable. That's an order. Thomas left early, driving back to the airport with shaking hands. On the plane he stared at the clouds and realized the truth. He was tired of orders. Tired of hiding. Back in New York, Charles met him at the airport. One look at Thomas's face and he pulled him into a brief, fierce hug right there in arrivals. No one noticed. Or maybe they did. For the first time Thomas didn't care. The climax came on a rainy Tuesday. A tabloid blog posted a blurry photo of Thomas and Charles leaving the penthouse together at dawn. The headline screamed speculation. Stock dipped 3% before lunch. The board called an emergency meeting. Thomas walked in head high. Charles sat beside him, calm and steady. "Gentlemen," Thomas began, "rumors are circulating. Let me be clear. Charles and I are together. Not as friends. As partners. If that changes your confidence in our leadership, I will step down as CEO today." Gasps rippled through the room. One director stood. "This could destroy the company." Charles spoke then, voice strong. "Or it could make us stronger. We've hidden long enough. Our personal lives have never affected performance. They won't now." The meeting ended without resolution. Thomas and Charles walked out side by side into the rain. "You didn't have to do that," Charles said quietly. "I did. For both of us." That evening Ryan called. "I saw the news. Proud of you." Thomas thanked him, genuinely grateful. The man who had delivered the truth had become an unexpected ally. Family fallout was immediate. His father left a blistering voicemail. His sister texted, "How could you?" Thomas read each message, then turned off his phone. Charles cooked pasta in the penthouse kitchen, moving with quiet efficiency. They ate on the couch, shoulders touching, and for the first time the contact felt natural, right? But the real test came at midnight. Charles received a call from his own parents. Thomas watched his face crumple as he listened. When he hung up, Charles turned to him. "They said don't come home for Christmas. Ever." Thomas pulled him close. "Then we'll make our own family. Right here." Tears came then, for both of them. Years of suppressed pain poured out. They held each other through the night, not as lovers in the physical sense yet, but as two men finally free to feel everything they had denied. Spring arrived with new beginnings. The board, after weeks of internal debate, voted to support Thomas's leadership. Stock recovered and even climbed as media coverage shifted from scandal to admiration for their courage. Thomas came out publicly in a carefully worded interview, Charles beside him. The response was mixed, but the support from employees and younger investors surprised them both. Thomas flew Charles to a quiet beach house in the Hamptons for a long weekend. They walked the shore at sunset, hands brushing until fingers finally intertwined. "I wasted so many years being afraid," Thomas said. Charles squeezed his hand. "We both did. But we're here now." They talked about the future. Expanding the company with inclusive policies, perhaps starting a foundation for LGBTQ youth in tech. Thomas's family remained distant, but his sister began sending tentative texts. Healing would take time, but it had begun. Ryan visited once, bringing wine and laughter. "You two look good together," he said without bitterness. The three men toasted to honesty and new chapters. One evening on the penthouse terrace, city lights sparkling below, Thomas turned to Charles. "Thank you for waiting, for loving me even when I couldn't love myself." Charles smiled, the same smile that had anchored Thomas for 15 years. "Worth every second." They stood there shoulder to shoulder, two men who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time it felt like theirs to shape. True or false? Hiding your true self can ever truly protect the ones you love?